Welcome back to another episode of Are You a Robot? Let's get a quick intro from our guest today, Enrico.
So I'm Enrico Panai, and I'm a philosopher that always worked in the ICT sector. I came from Italy, and now I'm living in France. Even if I spent a little bit of time in England, Scarborough, in North Yorkshire. And in my career, I worked as a consultant in the ICT sector and taught information technology at university for several years. And now I'm still working in the ICT sector as a ethicist of information. And so I'm working with the AI and other stuff like that.
So, in case you are new here and you have not listened to the episodes or the show before, I'm Dimitrios Brinkman, the host, and this is a series where we aim to tackle some of the greatest challenges and questions that stem from AI and related technologies. The way that we're going about that is by gathering all of the best minds in their respective fields to come on here and talk with me about what it is exactly they're doing, if they have any insights they can share with the greater community, and if there are any best practices that we can walk away with. So, I will mention that we are not done here. If you like what you hear, if you like what you're listening to, jump in to our Slack community, which we have built around these topics. And we really are trying to create a space so that those of us who like to nerd out on AI ethics and all of the other technologies that pertain to this, we can go there and talk with like-minded individuals. Jump into our Slack community. You can find a link to that below in the description. And last but not least, I want to give a huge shout out to our sponsor for this season. If you've listened to the other seasons, you know that our past sponsors are usually ethics grade, but this season we changed it up and we have ForHumanity sponsoring the show. ForHumanity, for anyone who doesn't know, it's an organization that is developing an infrastructure of trust in AI through independent audits of AI systems. We've had a lot of the ForHumanity fellows on the show before, so you've probably heard it talked about. But now, this season, they came and they said, hey, we like what you're doing. We want to sponsor it. So a big thank you to Ryan and all the folks at ForHumanity for the hard and incredible work they are doing. And without further ado, let's talk with Enrico.
Are you a robot?
Excellent. Enrico, I appreciate you coming on here. I know we've been having a little bit of technical difficulties, so I can already see that you are a patient man, and that is a virtue, as they say. So thank you for joining us. Maybe you could give us a bit of information to start on your background and how you came to be where you are.
Okay. I started developing when I was 10 years old with my first home computer. Then I was passionate about philosophy, and I decided to study philosophy at university. But at the time, philosophy, at least in Italy, was already separated by the scientific disciplines. So I decided to study philosophy, trying to do exams in other faculties just to have a more scientific background. And then I presented at the end, I presented a thesis with a ethicist, a philosopher of ethics, and a mathematician that was working already in artificial intelligence, in neuronal networks. So at the very beginning, I mixed the two fields very much. But when I was at university, I started working for the industry of the. I started to teach ICT for the some airline companies, some telecommunication companies, and so I always worked in this sector. And at the end of university, I had the chance to after 1 year spent in England, in Scarborough, North Yorkshire, and I think you know the beautiful song of Samuel Garfunkel about it. I came back to Italy and became a professor at university in computing in the humanities. Nowadays, digital humanities. And so I worked for about 7 years at university, but always doing consulting for the ICT industry. And then I decided to leave to France, and I left the academy and started to work for some big insurance companies, and and, and carried on teaching ICT at several levels, from engineers to unemployed people, because what I liked it was feeling the informational transformation that we were living. So it was my way to understand how everything was happening. And so I always worked from coding to informational strategies. So from consulting to little small companies to CEO. And I like changing the level of abstraction anytime, the level of granularity, and so. But what I realized was that everything that helped me to make decision was the strong framework in ethics I just built when I was at university. Every kind of decision, from the position of a button, the color of an interface, a line of code, they are made by your capacity to understand how your decision is going to impact the informational environment around you.
It's fascinating stuff. And I know you're working with ForHumanity right now. And I'd love to get a bit of color around what exactly you're doing with ForHumanity and a little more information about it. I imagine people that are listening have heard about ForHumanity. We've had Ryan on here, who is the founder of ForHumanity, and we've also talked about ForHumanity quite a bit. But your specific projects with ForHumanity, what are you doing with them?
So I arrived. I started to collaborate with Ryan last year, and I'm quite a shy guy at the beginning. When I arrived in an environment I don't know, I spend a bit of time to understand what the hell they are doing or talking about. And while I'm a philosopher, I because I'm a philosopher, I can't stand not to understand every bit of what I'm coping with. So on my own, I started to draw the ontology of ForHumanity, to try to understand every kind of knowledge they were using, how they were using words, how they were using concepts, and the contradiction between a concept in different languages and different cultures. Because in ForHumanity we have a lot of different culture from several countries, a lot of people that are not English native speakers, and like me, and even for people of the same country, if you have a semantic capital behind you that make you understand the word in a way or in another, you have to find a bridge to make people to communicate. So my first step was trying to learn, and the learning curve was very, very steep, and so I had to create this ontology, and it took me a few months. And from that, I started to change level of abstraction, and I worked on the real database of the criteria we are developing with ForHumanity. So now I'm Ryan would call me chief technological officer, but I don't like the word technological because it's too narrow. I would prefer kind of chief semantic officer, trying to find the hidden meanings of what we are doing and try to make it computational so we can produce stuff and scale up the association. This is one thing I'm doing. And the other one I'm passionate and I'm working a lot on it also is the code of data ethics. Generally, we are talking about code of ethics in enterprises, but there are not a lot of code of data ethics around in the market. And generally, when you have something written, there are general principles. So be fair, be transparent, and okay, that's fair enough. But the point is, when you are going to code something, you need something more to make a good decision. And so I'm trying to. I took a great paper from Luciano Floridi and Maria Rosaria Taddeo. They are working at Oxford, and it is what is data ethics. And I tried to build a real code of data ethics starting from this framework. And so this is the two main things I'm doing at the moment.
Can you talk a little bit more about this code of data ethics and what exactly is it? If I'm an engineer, can I use it while I'm coding and there's certain check marks that I should be aware of?
Yes, you transform it in some. I don't think that we should give rules for programming, because if you give only rules, you risk to destroy the creativity of a developer. So it's not good enough. But you have to create a clean environment where people can reason in an ethical way, can make the good decision. They need to have the good language to do it, and the good processes, and they have to be helped to make decisions. So in this very moment, we generally have the ethics officers on a high level, but I never knew a developer that would call an ethics officer when he's developing, because the majority of decisions are very small. So you are not going to make a meeting about it. But if the developers start to reflect about the process of data in an ethical way, then when he's making a decision, he's going to make the right decision. I explain you the code of data ethics. The code of data ethics, it implies that everybody in an organization will have some specific responsibilities and will take into account some kind of reasoning. An important point at the moment is that data ethics is not only ethics, because ethics in an organization is more about business ethics. It's not about data ethics. So you have already to devise the three main area of data ethics, working about data, how to collect, how to stock, how to treat this data, and the processing, how to work on algorithms and how to produce outputs. And at the same time, you have all the practices around it. For example, if you need to make people think in an ethical way, you need to give them the skills to do them. So to teach them how to think in an ethical way with the right language. And another thing is to give them the time to do that, because generally nobody gives the developers the time to think about a problem.
So I like what you said there about the small decisions being made by developers. And it reminds me of that saying, death by a thousand cuts. And before you know it, you've created a monster by all of these small decisions that you're making. And the first thing that comes to my mind is, while coding, is it not the bigger picture that is more important to get ethically correct as opposed to the few lines of code that you're executing to try and get to that bigger picture?
Um, I think that we are talking a lot about nudging in psychology, and about the way AI should behave. And now, when you are creating, I'll be very technical there. When you are creating a select list with several options, the way you do it, you you are nudging the behavior of the people who are using the interface. Even in that, if just to put the OK button on the right and the cancel button on the left, you are reducing the time on dialogue with the interface, because I'm going to click on the OK button, but if the cancel is on the right, I have to think, I'm really sure that I want to click OK, or I have to take more time to it. And generally it's a few seconds, but those few seconds are very important for people who use a lot of time the same interface. So now I'm not talking about how this impacts the artificial intelligence, but even in the smallest process, you can interfere in this system. And I think that yes, you need to have the big picture. You need to change the level of abstraction anytime. But a developer that is coding and is getting 300 error per day because he forgotten a comma, he forgotten a variable to declare a variable, or who codes knows this kind of stuff, and so he's completely frustrated. He has not the time to reflect about these stuffs, because his manager is asking him to produce something. And this is very important, because he could produce something better, and that his thought is designed behind the interface. That's why at the beginning I told you I'm working with human in information interaction, not human computer interaction, because the information starts from your brain and is going to arrive to another brain. And it's not only the media I'm using to translate this information. That's why talking about technology is not enough. We have to talk about all the informational process.
I think that the point that you're making around time and taking the time, not only from the user, the end user perspective, but also from the developer perspective, to reflect, is a fascinating piece that you're looking at. And so as a developer, you mentioned it very clearly here, that a developer has maybe deadlines to hit, or they're doing their 2-week sprint and they got to get something pushed out by today, and they don't have that time to sit and reflect on what they're creating. In this framework that you're making, how does that change?
It's changed because all the chain of decision makers, so the CEO, the ethical officers, etc., they have to allow people to have the time to do it. They have to declare that people are have the skills, the language, and the time to do this kind of decisions. And if you don't, it's like training for security problems. Okay, in any factory, you have training every month to reduce the problems about security. If you want to improve the ethical reasoning, you have to do it every time. I don't know if you ever heard about Dan Ariely. For me, is a great behavioral psychologist, and he was worked a lot about behavioral people and even how people cheat during tests. And he demonstrated that the ethical bubble we are in it can't last a long time. It should be reinforced very often. So, for example, he tested something very stupid. He demanded to different classes from different university in the US to swear to be honest, respecting the code of the university. But only one of the three universities he tested had in reality a code. So just the idea of swearing it makes you in an ethical bubble. Another test showed that, for example, if you ask people to list the 10 commandments, even if they are not Christians, they are entering in an ethical bubble. Another testing shows that if you sign a declaration at the beginning and not at the end, you declare the honest information about your declaration more than you sign at the end. So the ethical bubble is something that we have to notice, we have to reinforce every day or very often. We can't not pretend to have a developer that will behave ethically if we don't if we don't reinforce this bubble every time.
So it's the ethical bubble and the ability to nurture. I liked that word that you're saying, nurture the ethics within a team, within a company, and make sure that everyone is continuously being held to that standard and also continuously learning about the ethics of a company, I would imagine. And so that they don't go too long before seeing that ethics are important and an important part of a company culture. And so that way it's never too far from their mind, and it's not something that's in the back of their mind. It's something that is very much at the front of their mind. So speaking about the 2-week sprints that most software development teams act in, is this just budgeting time for reflection, or is there active ethical classes that you're asking people to go through? What exactly does that look like in practice?
That's funny because the majority of people think that ethics is like a burden to produce something fast. And I'm the living example that an ethical thinking is the way to produce faster than if you don't think ethically. It's I like an example. I will quote today, as always, a lot of time the same philosopher, the father of the philosophy of information, Luciano Floridi, and he generally used to say that philosophy is like a long jumper. He take a few steps backward and he think to jump higher in order to go further. So we are taking just 2 steps backward, but we'll go further. Now, if I was a philosopher, a standard philosopher that never coded and never had to produce outputs, I wouldn't be reliable. But in reality, I do produce outputs, and generally in a fast way, just because I think ethically. And I use a particular kind of ethics. I use the ethic that is adapted to this century and to our technologies. So the ethics of information. If I try to use another kind of ethics, I wouldn't be so efficient in my developing. So you have to choose the right tool for the right century. And for me, the right tool is the ethics of information today. And I'll tell you something more. The ethics of information was developed in the few 20 years, but in reality, the people who started in the 90s to develop with the philosophical approach, they already used this ethic every day. So it's there. It was only structured in a few decades, a few last decades. So I think that ethics is the right instrument to go faster, not to slow down the process.
Yeah, it is the constant debate that you hear that if we start adding in all of this ethics crap, then we're never going to advance or we're never going to innovate. So I appreciate you pointing that out and showing that you are living proof that that is not true. I'm wondering why you feel philosophy is important, and particularly important when it comes to coding and AI slash machine learning.
Okay. I'll so philosophy is important. I'm quoting Bertrand Russell. I would say that philosophy is important because it's enrich your intellectual thinking. So you can have a critical thinking, and you know how to make better questions, and that's good. The point is that if you are able only to make questions and not only to give some answers, you are not useful for a company. So you should be a philosopher that create a good questions and to help to find also a good answers. And in this case, I'll quote again Floridi is generally thinking about philosophy. It uses a metaphor that I do love. It's about salt. He's saying that philosophy is like salt. So if you use philosophy, you have to use philosophy a bit everywhere, like in dishes, but you cannot eat spoons of salt because you'll die of it. So you should use philosophy a bit everywhere because it helps you to structure your reasoning. We'll talk maybe later which kind of philosophy is important, but just before you told about the problem of ethics and how it's seen as a problem. And the point is that people do not realize that they use ethics and philosophy every day, in every moment, because you have your own ethical framework to make any kind of decision. The point is to know which one you are using and not to be driven by your framework, but to be able to manage with it. Just for an example, generally people make a mistake about etiquette and ethics. So we have to do it because everybody do it. This is etiquette. Okay, so it's a burden, something more that we have to do. And it's very formal, like you go to the queen, so you have an etiquette to respect. It's not about ethics. Ethics is a tool used by philosophy to find the better, not the best, because you will never find the best solution, but the better solution in a context, in a defined context. So the philosophy gives you all the tools to make this kind of reasoning. And if you do not have, if you never studied philosophy, you are always making philosophical reasoning because your life is made by philosophy. Because I don't know if you have any children, but a child, very young child, ask questions, philosophical questions very early. Why God exists, why there is life and death, why we do something or something not. So philosophy is like our language. It's so connected to language that we cannot imagine to separate our language from our way of thinking. So my point is that is there, and it's like a horse that you cannot manage, or you try to study philosophy to try to manage this horse that it's very strong, but it's difficult to ride.
All right, so I like the notion that you were talking about on how we are always going through and living out our philosophical beliefs in the day to day. It really reminds me of, yeah, like this saying, another saying, which is we're a product of our environment, and without even realizing it, we're making these choices. We don't necessarily consciously realize we're making decisions in every moment, but it's happening. And sometimes they're unconscious, sometimes they're conscious. But what I like that you mentioned is bringing that to the forefront and making it so it's like we are acting instead of reacting. And when we are making choices, we're very clear and concise, and also we know that we are making a choice on this. Whether or not we are choosing, like you said, we can't be 100% ethical, ethically perfect, because ethics are the looking for the best solution, not the perfect solution, because there is no perfect ethical solution there. So I like this idea also about the philosophers and the two different kinds of philosophers that you talk about, and how if you just raise questions and call yourself a philosopher, then you're not providing any business value to a company. You have to also bring with it some suggestions of the solutions to, or the answers to the questions that you're providing. Now, what other professions do you feel we need in the AI development at this time? For example, is there a need right now for more lawyers to be involved in the machine learning model development life cycles? Or is there a need for, as you were saying, more philosophers? Or is it just that we need to take these engineers that are already working on this stuff, or the data scientists, and make philosophers out of them in the little ways that we can?
Okay. I think that I start with lawyers that I love, but they want to be compliant to rules. So it's another kind of job. We need lawyers, but in everyday life we use ethics more than law. Okay, it's our way of living. So I don't think we need more philosopher, because it would be a sectarian approach. Like it's every philosopher is a good philosopher. No, no, no. I won't say that to you. We need more philosophy and more good philosophy. And we need good philosopher also to be like a coaches that help people to find the word to use to talk about a kind of topic. But we need a lot of different profession when we are talking about AI. For example, think that the NASA use Robert Lang as an expert for origami to fold the satellite, to unfold them when they arrive into space. And that's the point. He's a physician, but his origami competence, it helps to do his job. So at the same time, in AI, we are working with human behavior, so we need psychologists. We are working with something very profound in people. So we need artists to know how a kind of artificial intelligence can change profoundly a person. As a philosopher, I would say ontologically a person. But we also need pedagogists to help to learn, to find a better way to learn stuff. And for example, nobody talk about it, but we would need magicians in AI because we are treating a lot of biases, and who are the best people to manage with biases if not magicians? So why we don't call magicians to make help us find a better solutions for the AI we are producing? So I don't think we need a category. We need a language, a common language, and philosopher can help to find this kind of language. Like Wittgenstein would say, it's the riverbed where our thought should flow, but the riverbed should be the same. If everybody is talking with a polysemantic word, so the word that are portmanteau where you put every meaning you wish inside, then you find people that don't understand each other, and it's impossible to find a solution. So I think we need philosophy and not only philosopher. Yes, you're right. Why we don't teach philosophy to engineers? And that's a big problem for me because I have a son and I see how schools are organized. And when you arrive at a certain level, they make you choose more scientific or philosophical or literary. But why? Just in all the history of philosophy, philosophers were mathematicians. Why you can study philosophy and mathematics? And I make you. There is something that it's a dream of mine. I love cooking, and I think that the cooking is the best metaphor to learn the world. So when I cooking, I can talk with my son about economy of products, about chemistry, physics, philosophy, and geopolitics, and everything. And you can just talk about it in a kitchen using the thing you are producing, even data. Think about the metaphors of data, like data are like the petrol, the petrol, the gas of today. That's not true because we are running off this kind of carbon products. They are like, and we are multiplying data. So the metaphor is not the right one. The data are more like food that we produce, that we have to treat before putting them in an algorithm to make them work. So it's more the metaphor of the kitchen that you are using when you are tracking data. So why you don't use a product that has expired to make your dishes, because it won't be good. At the same time, when you are using data in machine learning, you have to care about the data you are using, and they have a life cycle that you have to respect, and they are going to produce something in your everyday life. You'll be more healthy, you'll live well, and if you eat something good, you'll be more happy. And it's the same with data.
Now I'm starting to understand why you had that salt metaphor back a few minutes ago. And philosophy being something that you sprinkle on top of the food and it brings out the flavor, it enriches things, but it's not meant to be eaten as a spoonful.
Yeah.
So that's incredible, and also it shows how creative you are and able to take anything and bring it into these metaphors of food. I'm wondering, because you're one of the few people that I talk to that is very deep into philosophy, but also is very deep into coding and tech. Why do you feel there is not as much of these two worlds being combined? You mentioned before that in school you get separated into the two different lines. Maybe you go into literature or the humanities, and that in the way that we educate our students these days is diametrically opposed to the hard sciences or the different things like coding. So, what is it that you feel creates the lack of the philosophers in coding? Is it that? Is it just school? I don't think that can be like the easiest scapegoat. Or it's too easy of a scapegoat is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I must admit that sometimes philosophers are very boring. So it's not every kind of philosopher that is interesting to listen, because when you cannot I'll take a step back. In computer science, you use level of abstractions to find the right solution for a problem. In philosophy of information, you use the same level of abstraction to find the right solution for a philosophical problem. The point is that I do like using this kind of level of abstraction and changing the granularity I use for each kind of problem. That is completely philosophical. And if you imagine that everywhere in hard science they use a philosophical tool like logic, you imagine that philosophy is very important for the epistemology of science today. You can't not do science without logic, but logic is made by philosophers, not by only mathematicians. So, and the point is, there are other tools in philosophy that can be interesting, but I'm talking now of two Swiss knives that we can use every day. One is logics, and the other one is ethics. Okay? We do live in an ethical world. Even the worst criminals have got their own ethical framework to make a decision. So ethics is everywhere. The point is how to use this kind of ethics, or the right kind of ethics, to make a decision when developing. Why you say why we don't find a lot of philosophers that are coding or developers that are doing philosophy? I don't know. I know that I would distinguish between old developers and young developers. And as always, when you did a lot of mistakes, you try to find the meaning of what you are doing. So you are going to steer toward the philosophical approach. Now, I had the opportunity to study philosophy at the beginning and to code at the beginning, so it was just a problem of luck in my generation. But I found it very easy because I love coding. Why? Because it's pure logic. It's a formal language, and you are right or wrong. It's easy. But if you do something only for related to the code, if you don't change the way you reason about the code, you are becoming, I would use a strong word, but quite a Nazi. It's when rules and algorithms are not used for humanity, and this is the word, not for you or me, not for me and my son or the citizen in France or in Europe. It's not only people, but the relation we have together. That's it's important, and generally the philosophers are quite egocentric, and so philosophy is quite focused on me and myself and the I and the entity, but not the relation. We should put ourselves in the periphery and take care on what we are doing. And that's it's very visible in an informational system. You make a developer produce a software, and the person who is doing the software is God that is doing a system. It's not a father who cares for his son or for his daughter that is using a system. In France, I fought a lot of time because developers used to call the final user the lambda user. And I told them, but a lambda user, it's a person, okay? It's not a lambda user, it's a person. And if you want to make your software efficient, your software must create a relation with this person in the long term. So I think that philosophy and information technology are quite. It can be very very near nowadays. And I believe a big problem is education. And I fought against my university to find, to go in another faculty study databases and operational systems and logics. I fought because it wasn't normal. Because I liked, because I didn't like to talk only about philosophy. I like to talk about music when we are talking about music without quoting Aristotle when I'm talking about music, even if my structure of thought are made by the philosophical reasoning. So I have to change this kind of abstraction, be real, and just to answer and finish with your questions. The philosopher I liked when I started to study philosophy was Socrates. And strangely enough, at the end of my studies, I always liked Socrates as a philosopher because generally you know a lot of new stuff, so you change your advisors. But Socrates was the only one that never wrote anything, nothing. Okay, it's the only philosopher, and he was the only one that didn't really create I can say a group of philosophers that followed him. So you have Plato and Aristotle, and you have two kind of line of discussion. But Socrates was a unique element in history of philosophy, and he was a great fighter. When he was younger, he was a fighter, and a person that could reason very well. It wasn't very interested on making money. What he liked was something very important and that we lack today a lot. It was time, a lot of time to discuss. That's why I was telling you we need education and we need time. Give time to people.
So what do you think we can do to encourage more philosophers or philosophy, as you said. I think there's a big distinction there, not more philosophers, because too many cooks in the kitchen spoil the soup, as they say, but more philosophical conversations, more philosophy to enter into the world of AI these days.
Starting by education. There are some kindergarten. I have a great friend of mine. She studied philosophy with me, and she worked for years in kindergarten. And she used to do philosophy with children. So it's feasible, and they start to reflect. I used the verb to do philosophy, because the difference is to talk about philosophy. That's when it's not funny. You know, we are going to discuss what Spinoza said, and we have two different opinions. Okay, it's great. We can have a wonderful discussion, but we are not doing philosophy. We are discussing about philosophy and what other people think about a philosopher. So, and you can do philosophy every day. You do it when a person tell me sometimes I imagine myself being a bird, but what you are doing if your philosophy of the mind, you don't have the language, but you started to think about it. So that's the first point. We need more philosophy everywhere, and not only history of philosophy, and not only for 1-2 years. We need the philosophy from the beginning to university, because if we don't do that now, we need more philosophy in the future for developers anyway. So we need to introduce philosophy in schools, and to have also good philosopher that teach philosophy. I had the opportunity to have a great professor of philosophy when I was in high school, and we are still talking and sending messages every month, exchanging papers, and he's not at all a nerd, but and he's got political opinions that are sometimes different from mine, but we always worked on the well-being of our relation. So we have to respect this environment when we live, and our ideas should be exchanged with respect and in a way that we can improve a little bit humanity. Because I won't change the world, I'm sure of it, but I do a little bit better every day. The second thing is time. Again, we need, if you give a lot of homework to the kid, he won't have the time to be bored. Boredness is the first element to become a philosopher. Okay, you need this. In the north of Europe, there is a new approach that is developing. I read a few weeks ago. It's about the Nixon. The Nixon approach stress on the importance of respecting your chronotype. Grosso modo, generally said, when you are working in a company, you have to find your time to do nothing, just nothing. And then you'll be more efficient when you are making decision. And that's normal. So we should respect ourselves. Those are for me the two elements that we have to add to the process to bring more philosophy in our everyday life.
There's so many great points there, and especially when it comes to doing philosophy as opposed to just speaking about it or studying it. It's much different. I like the verb there to invoke this action of actually being present with it and mixing, being intertwined in the whole process of philosophy. And then the other piece, of course, time is one of those things right now that is huge. And I've heard it many times spoken about how important it is for a child in their development process to be bored. And so I can get behind you on that one. I know that with children, it is something I see with my own daughter. She needs that time to go and be bored, and so that she can be creative and she can learn from that boredom. And also with ourselves in our own lives, when was the last time that we just sat and did nothing? So it is an important factor. We need to bring more of that into our lives, and or at least try and incorporate a bit more of that into our daily lives. Now, Enrico, this has been incredible. I know that I've kept you a little bit over time. Speaking of time, I want to be respectful of it and of your time. And so I have one last question for you. Enrico, are you a robot?
No, I'm too lazy to be a robot. I cannot be a robot. You know, if you find again the etymology of robot, it's a slave, a forced labor. So I just cannot be a slave of labor, and so being a robot. It's not my aim. Yes, I do sometimes some repetitive process because they are we are used with that. But definitely, I want to have a lot of robots to do the stuff I don't like to do around me, and to gain time, to have more time. Okay, so the robots are welcomed if they are not going to take my time. That's the point. When you are developing a robot, it should not take my time. That's the first element. So, in a philosophical way, we should say it should not increase the metaphysical entropy of my infosphere. That's it. A robot should not bother me with stupid reasoning, and should me just let me free to think for myself, because I do love it. It's my artistic part of thinking.
Is a robot ever going to be able to cook as well as you do?
Never.
Excellent. Enrico, this has been fascinating. I love it. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I appreciate your patience through all of these technical difficulties that we had. And the people listening probably will never realize what kind of hoops we had to jump through to get this recorded, but it was done. We persisted and we made it happen. So thanks again, Enrico.
Thank you very much to you. Bye.